I've started out wanting to stop young people killing themselves. That was the kind of start of my journey at school, right? Impacted by youth suicide, and kind of went on this journey to say, how do I make a difference to that? We're screaming out for connection and community, right? And meaning. Yeah. So if you as a founder can tap into what people are looking for and help build a community that people feel like they belong to. Belonging and meaning are two of the most important things to us as humans that people are looking to fill. We kept going for 18 months. Like, it was my learning, like my CTO was like, and I'm like, no, I believe. And she's like, no. And she was right. I think a great quote that I always come back to is like, innovation looks like failure for the first 99 times. And then in the 100th time, everyone's like, oh, look at this, amazing invention that's come from nowhere. It's like, no. That didn't just come from nowhere. That was like so many failures to reach that point.
Welcome to Startup Journey's Founders Unplugged podcast. I'm your host, Paul King, and today we have Cameron Neal, founder of Red Hat Impact and Lend for Good, joining us. With over 2 decades of experience, Cameron is a seasoned entrepreneur making a significant impact in the startup space. In this episode, Cameron takes us on a journey challenging the way we think about startups. We delve into the positive work entrepreneurs are doing to have a real impact on the world. Cameron shares impactful funding advice for early stage founders, drawing from his experience at Red Hat Impact. What sets this podcast apart is its focus on the authentic journey, not just success stories. Cameron's experience goes beyond the conventional, exploring the power of building brand communities and connections in the modern business landscape. Stay tuned for a thought-provoking conversation on the impact of startups and the lessons learned in the entrepreneurial journey. Without further ado, let's dive into Startup Journeys, Founders Unplugged with Cameron Neal. Welcome, Cameron. Cameron Neal, you're the co-founder and director of Lend for Good and Red Hat Impact. Welcome to the show, and thank you for being my guest today.
It's a great pleasure to be here, Paul. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about my journey.
Yes, I'm really, really keen to know more about your journey. So I guess let's start with you telling us a bit about yourself and your journey.
Sure. Thanks, Paul. I've started out wanting to stop young people killing themselves. That was the kind of start of my journey at school, right? Impacted by youth suicide, and kind of went on this journey to say, how do I make a difference to that?
Wow,
a long and winding,
yeah,
and it still is. And I guess what my own journey of discovery as a then 16, 17-year-old, then went to uni and studied psychology, was that the big systems of the world that we sit in is really what's behind what happens to individuals. I guess my own analysis of things is that 80% of it is the system and 20% is the individual in general terms, give or take, certain circumstances. But what I really understood when I graduated from university and started work in youth services in Ipswich, west of Brisbane, which was a community that was broken by the collapse of the manufacturing sector. The big train yards that it used to have and other kind of heavy industry had all left. And what you had was 3 generations of Centrelink kids, and unemployment and drug abuse and a whole bunch of stuff, which when you kind of understood what was going on economically and how much economic participation was a key to inclusion and meaning in our society, it was no wonder that they were looking for escape, and that included attempting to kill themselves. They didn't see, you couldn't ask them where they would be in 5 years. They didn't have a sense of the future. And that had nothing to do with them. They were just born in that location, and that's what the economic market threw at them, and the market. And what that led me to understand increasingly is what I would be reading in the Weekend Australian Financial Review had more to do with what was happening in these kids' lives than anything else, than, you know, their own individual failures as humans, you know, that they were putting heroin in their arm and whatever. Like, you know, these macroeconomic forces. And what that's taken me on this journey is, how do I change systems? How do I create the change that can unlock opportunity for young people so that they can thrive, and that they, when they look into the future, they see a role for themselves. When anyone, anywhere can kind of, wherever they're born, kind of say, well, there's an opportunity for me to do the things that I want to do as a human, right? We're a very long way from that, obviously, when you look around the world. Mm-hmm. But that's my own kind of journey, right? That's taken me from a psychology degree and a concern about youth suicide into now my day-to-day is spreadsheets and capital markets and money and all that kind of stuff, because those are the key levers in our society that we need to play with in order to make a difference to what those kids in Ipswich experienced, you know, 25 years ago when I was doing that work. And so that's kind of been my journey from there and a psychology degree to now, you know, working on a startup, a fintech startup that's all about changing the way capital works and moves. That core reason why flows through. Just, I guess, the way that I'm working on it, the tools that I use are different now.
Yeah. So that original experience has brought you down now to be working, you know, in this area of helping impact startups and enterprises to make a difference, even all around the world now, I notice.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. You know, and so, yeah, like while Sunshine Coast was kind of the place where I grew up and came to understand these challenges, and then working in Ipswich, these are not uncommon global experiences, as every community in the world is impacted by the way our global financial system works and the way money moves and the way we value that. And so, you know, again, I've been drawn into increasingly larger theatres, you know, not just Queensland, not just Australia, not just Asia Pacific, but working globally.
Yeah. So it's something that happened inside you at that time that impacted you. Obviously, you know, it was a terrible situation, and then that's, you know, grown your whole journey and made you work in this area and making a difference, which is fantastic to hear. I think impact startups are really important.
And, you know, I think a lot of us, most people I meet want to do positive work. They want to have an impact on the world around them. They want to do good things, right? And it's just, there's different ways to do that. How I choose to do it is no better or worse than someone else. But I guess, you know, I've found a specific calling or a specific way to kind of work on one part of the problem, you know, and it takes all of us doing things at all different points of our lives. Just, it doesn't even have to be our job, just, you know, personally, but, you know, all the way through. And, you know, I'm not at all saying that, you know, the work of psychology and what I was doing back then is not valuable. It is. I guess, you know, I just saw a different way to try and impact things, and that's taken me to a different place now. And it does bewilder me sometimes how, you know, I've gone from that, you know, to the work that I do now. And, you know, it's felt natural. It's felt like a natural progression, but it's definitely been, you know, definitely been a core running through of how do I make a positive difference, and what's the best way that I can do that as an individual.
Yeah. It must give you a lot of self-satisfaction, I would imagine. They say that helping others is the key to actual happiness ourselves.
Yeah, look, I mean, I got asked a couple of weeks ago, like, what is it that I do? What is it I want to do with my life? You know, and it's like, well, I just want to help awesome people do awesome stuff. Like, that's really when it boils down to. I get so much satisfaction of working with other entrepreneurs, other founders, other people, and helping them do the awesome things that they want to do that make the world better. And like, I get so much satisfaction and joy. And, you know, I find it really compelling to work with individuals and organizations to help solve the problems they've got in doing those awesome things. Like when you get into that problem space, that's when I kind of find, there's that concept of flow, where you kind of like everything's aligned and time just disappears and you just like you lose time because you're doing something you love, right?
Yeah.
That's where I'm in my happy place, is I'm working with people, helping solve problems, helping them do the awesome things that they want to do. And yeah, I'm lucky and very privileged to be able to get to do this work. But that space of helping others is definitely, for me, a space that I've found a lot of satisfaction with.
Yeah, and when you're in that flow, it really isn't work anymore, is it?
No, that's true. It's quite addictive, to be honest. Like, getting in
addiction.
getting in and helping solve problems. It is something that just, I get a rush from. Like, that moment of breakthrough with someone where you kind of help, like that's it. It's a great moment. But yeah, I'm really privileged that I guess with the work I've done, people trust me to sit with them and help them work on that stuff, and that I get to do those things.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And how do you think it's changed you over this time as an individual?
Oh, that's a really deep question, Paul. Thank you for asking the hard things. Like as an extrovert, I think I probably avoid doing a lot of introspection about those things, and I only tend to think about them when people in conversation ask me. So thank you for this opportunity to learn about myself, Paul.
Pleasure.
I think, at different times I have thought about it, because it's like the work is hard, right? Social change and systems change is a contact sport. Like it hurts sometimes, and it takes a lot of sacrifice, and you do get those highs I was just talking about, you equally get the lows, right? So why do you keep getting back up and doing it? I think you have to be intrinsically motivated. I don't think you can be motivated by external reward or money or anything to do this stuff. It just, you have to have something in you that says I'm compelled to do this. And I guess I've reflected on that in my upbringing and my life, and the experiences I had as a kid, to say, what in that has given me this intrinsic motivation to tackle this and work at it. And I'm not overly sure. I know that my grandparents are very influential, just in terms of their example of being very giving, altruistic, selfless people. That was kind of who they are, and they had a big influence on my life. But yeah, I guess, you don't change much, but you change a lot, perhaps, in how you represent that over the course of your life, right? And that's what I feel like. I don't feel like I'm terribly different in terms of how I'm motivated and kind of what I do compared to when I was 25. Just what I do and the skills I have and what I do with it and how I work on that has changed a lot, right? And I never imagined that I would be a startup founder. Like, that was never something that, as a 25-year-old, I thought I would do. Having said that, I guess having learnt that stuff and, think about that Ipswich example before, I was even then tinkering with, how to help these young people create micro businesses of their own, and to do little local sharing groups where they could have their needs met without needing to earn heaps of money, right? Because they're all on Centrelink. It's like, well, what could you do? Like, no one's coming to save you. How do we collaborate together, mutualism, and kind of help save each other? So, I guess I was kind of doing startup advisory, but just it wasn't called that, right? It was just kind of mentoring young kids to help them kind of find something meaningful to do with their life. But, I guess I've kind of played with that idea of economic participation, business, enterprise as a way for humans to kind of have some agency, in the world around them, from even those early days. And it's just like at a different scale now. But while I guess I never saw myself as a startup founder, I guess I've been helping other people kind of in that kind of space for as long as I can remember.
And can you give us an example of, say, an enterprise that you've helped that has had a huge impact that may stand out above others?
I've been privileged to work with lots of different organisations over the years in different ways, right? I think One of the things that I'm really proud of is, I was the first employee to go into the fair trade system here in Australia and New Zealand. So helping build that whole fair trade movement here that brought a lot of attention to overseas supply chains and, the role that we can play with our purchasing decisions in supporting coffee growers and cocoa growers, etc. That was something I spent 7.5 years, sometimes 70, 80 hours a week building that thing as an employee, right? Like, I was in there. It's not a startup in any way, but it was a startup. Like, we built that organization from the ground up. We attracted businesses. We went in and we worked with Woolworths and Coles and Cadbury's, et cetera, and had different conversations with business in Australia. And now, like, the expectation has shifted now for business worldwide in terms of what's expected of you with your supply chain, whether it's Australian farmers or overseas farmers. The expectation is, well, you should do the right thing because we know it is possible, right? So that was a very impactful thing that I got to spend, 7 years of my life doing, which has been quite formative in kind of what I spend my time doing now. But one of the enterprises that we've worked with that I think is an amazing example of just kind of impact innovation is a business called ATEC. And they're Australian based, but the work that they do has primarily to date been in Bangladesh and Cambodia.
Okay.
But what they're doing is focused on kind of clean cooking and energy transition, but in a real kind of grassroots way. So the first thing they did was these biodigesters in Cambodian and Bangladesh villages, where instead of going to buy fossil fuel gas, stuff to run kerosene lanterns and cook with, etc., they were making their own biodiesel through these biodigesters that they could then use on site. And, the money that they would save from having to buy fuel now, because they're making their own, they would use to pay off these biodigester systems over, a 30-month period or so. And again, so, like, they put that in, it transforms those lives. They then own the asset, and then the other product they've brought in is e-cook stoves. So, again, a lot of women in these countries it's very dangerous for them to go out and collect wood. Not only is it very difficult and time-consuming work in terms of what they do, but they often have to take their small children, and it exposes them to predation from men. They get damaged, collecting the firewood, all that kind of stuff. So again, putting a cook stove in their home that's electronically powered that they can use, it's stopping wood burning, it's increasing women's safety, giving women more time because they are now got more time back in the day they can put into other things, getting their kids to school, other kinds of things, and huge reduction in carbon emissions. So what they've done now with these e-cook stoves is they've got these smart little things in there, and they're selling gold standard carbon credits to large companies that want verified true carbon emission reductions by putting these into households, right? And that's helping those individual households and villages pay off those things faster, and and then giving them an income stream, which is just amazing. And like, again, like the focus on women and girls and climate that they've done there through what they're doing is phenomenal. And we've been able to support them with a couple of loans that's helped them buy the cook stoves and the digesters up front to then deploy. But they're an amazing business that's just really delivering so much impact at a time where everyone needs that, right? And the flywheels that come from that impact stack on climate, on women, on girls, on
the ripple effect,
environments. Like, it's just it's phenomenal and just really clever. And then that's the thing I think with a lot of this impact work is the technology is not necessarily sophisticated, right? It's just it's the social innovation required to kind of put the business models together to find what those business models are that work, and to focus on grassroots adoption and those kind of things. It's not a high-tech business really at all. Like, now they've added those smart chips into the cook stoves to have real-time monitoring of use and carbon credit stuff. That's pretty good. It's not cutting edge, but it's a good use of applied technology. But that's not where they started, right? And I think ATEC's a great example. Have a look online, anyone who's watching. But ATEC Global And, they're now working in Rwanda. They've just gone into some new places in Asia as well. And beginning to kind of expand what they do. And Australian enterprise, no one's probably heard of them. But the innovation they're bringing to the world and the difference they're making is just phenomenal.
That's fantastic, yeah, and such a small thing that can have such a ripple effect in so many different areas.
Yeah,
it's interesting when you're talking about fair trading, because I think around 8-10 years ago, I was in Cambodia with a founder of a fair trading startup, and she was getting things made. Tonle Sap, the lake, Tonle Sap. Yeah. So there was women that were living on the lake there. They have these little houses that are just, floating, made out of wood, just homemade. And they were living there, and they were all working for this enterprise. And it really actually improved all their lives. So they're able to send their kids to school. They're able to, make a reasonable living, so improve their lives dramatically. So these little things, and you're involved in that fair trading in the very early days. So it's so much impact.
Very early days here in Australia. Yeah, I mean, that's 20 years ago. I started at the end of 2003 in that role. Yeah. So it was about 20 years ago this month is kind of when I kicked off working on that, right? And again, I think some of the impacts of that is not just you talked about the individual lives, right? And the individual lives of farmers and artisans that can be transformed. But I think some of the biggest impacts of something like fair trade, which I think comes down to part of what being an entrepreneur is, right? It's changed the imagination and changed the kind of expectation of what's possible. By doing it for 25, 30 years now, it's proven that it is possible to run commercially viable, profitable businesses and pay people fairly in your supply chain, right? Yeah. It's anyone who says it's impossible is making excuses, and it changes the understanding of what's possible. And I think what entrepreneurs do is they push the boundaries of that. They kind of can imagine that things are different than how they are. And that's what they work on then, is creating that example. And so I think the impact of entrepreneurs is often much bigger than just the thing that they do. It's kind of challenging the way people think and the way people are now to say, well, what if it was different? And can it be different? And I think that's kind of what motivates entrepreneurs is, well, what if, as opposed to, well, that's the way it is, right? I think that to me, when I think about that work, it's it's those things that are very difficult to measure or quantify the impact that has had, but the change of consumer expectation, the change of business expectation, how do you measure that? And I think that is a huge change, which creates a whole bunch of opportunities for social enterprise now in Australia, which is really taking off. But what I think is what I have seen change over that, and I think one of the things I used to say, my work when I was at Fair Trade was trying to convince people to do good with business, right? That was kind of that argument's been won, right? Everyone knows business can do good now, but a lot of my work now is helping businesses that do good be good businesses, because a lot of people that start businesses to do good are not good business people. And so my work is now great, you've got a business that's trying to do good. How do I help that business be a good business so you can do more of it and you can grow it and it can be bigger?
And that was me. I was not a good business person when I started my startup 6 years ago. I learned a lot along the way, and let's then go into a few questions whereby you can give some advice to early or new startup founders. So, I mean, obviously you're deeply involved in the impact, capital, innovation. So what advice would you offer early stage founders who are looking to make a positive impact with their startups, especially in terms of securing the right type of funding?
Yeah, look, I think that's something that we've spent a lot of time on, and that I've spent a lot of time on over the last 10 years. Is I think it's generally accepted now, that maybe it wasn't as visible 10 years ago, that there's just not the innovation in the types of finance that's available that often meets the needs, particularly of impact entrepreneurs and impact founders. But I think there's a general kind of gap of kind of availability of capital for early stage businesses. I think Judo Bank did a piece of research, maybe 5 years ago now, which said there was like a $90 billion capital gap for small and medium-sized enterprise just in Australia, right? Like I think globally we talk about a $5.2 trillion gap for the missing middle for SME finance. So, it's challenging because like really your primary options are to go to a bank. And when you're an early stage impact entrepreneur, no bank's lending you money, and that's not what you need.
Hard to get anything really.
Yeah. Or you go and you raise equity, right? And if you're raising equity, well, that says you have to be a certain type of business. You have to be a commercially focused venture. You have to be for profit. You have to have shares that you can sell to people. And what we've observed is a lot of, unfortunately, and this is not an Australia only challenge. Unfortunately, the types of capital that are available kind of lead people to make decisions about the kind of business that they need to be, as opposed to thinking about what's the problem I'm trying to solve. And I think the thing that I guess I've learned, and it's hard every day to do it, is to try and understand what's the problem you're solving and what do I need to do to be able to solve that problem, and what's the right type of capital that allows me to continue to focus on doing that.
Yeah,
and
it's a key question, isn't it? If you don't know what problem to solve, then really you've got nothing.
Yeah, but I think when people think about the problem, they don't then make the separate connection to, well, what's the type of capital that best suits me for what I'm trying to do there? Because I think in general, capital is so scarce that we'll take whatever we can get and we'll contort into whatever we need to be in order to get the money that we think we need, right? And so, with my journey, I guess you hang a shingle out and say, well, we can help you get money. Everyone comes knocking because everyone needs money, right? But I think I'd say at least 5 times out of 10, at least 50% of the time, it's not that they need money. Like they just need some advice or some connections or some, some support on particular growth strategies or whatever to kind of figure out to get to the next stage. And quite often, if they do need money, the kind of money they think they have to go for because of what they see in the market is way beyond. We've seen people kind of go, well, I've spoken to some investors. They're not going to look at me unless I do $1 million plus because of the cost of due diligence. So I need to figure out like an equity raise of $1 million plus to be able to go out and get investment in my business. It's like, well, what do you need? Well, I need $60,000 to buy this container of stuff from Pakistan. It's like, well, could we give you $60,000 and you can do that, and so, I think, I do think that the capital landscape does impact what problems get solved. It does impact what things get money. I think increasingly people recognize that the Silicon Valley VC model does only work and is only relevant for like 5% of businesses. And of those 5% of businesses it's relevant for, most of those are not going to achieve the venture scale and venture returns that money is looking for anyway, and the investors know that. And so therefore their expectations of those ones that succeed are very high for them to be able to make their money, right? And so, I think it's a real challenge for impact enterprise founders to kind of piece together the kind of capital journey they need to get big. And even if they do successfully do things like get money from friends and family, they do successful like donation or reward-based crowdfunding campaigns, which are very good ways to kind of activate and build a community and get started.
Yeah.
You do hit this point where you kind of like, I'm too big for that now, but I'm not big enough to go and get a bank loan. Or I'm not big enough to go and get equity. Yeah. And that missing middle is the key thing that, myself and others are trying to figure out. How do we make it easier for founders to make that move? And I think increasingly people upstream with capital are beginning to understand that's possible. Certainly we do work with DFAT, and, they're beginning to understand the role of kind of blended finance and different types of capital across that to help entrepreneurs and enterprises get big enough that they're relevant for where the capital market is quite mature. Like once you get to that VC stage, the capital markets there are pretty good. Like they're pretty mature. They know what they're doing. But it's kind of getting people to that point that is the harder thing, right?
It is.
And
it
so
is, exactly that gap there. I mean, there's lots of VCs companies now in Australia. Like before, I think 20 years ago there was like 3, and now I don't know, it's hundreds.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's much better now. But that's just what I'm saying. Like it's sophisticated. Like that's not a problem we need to solve. So back to my thing about solving problems. That's not a problem I need to solve, right? Like that's done. It's more about how could we nurture more impact entrepreneurs to get to that stage where they can access that capital? But equally, how do we give them options where they never need to take that? Like because their business model is not grounded in an exit. It's not grounded in a 40x return. It's grounded in a particular problem they want to solve, and they want to be able to do that profitably, but not necessarily at the scale that they would need to do to satisfy kind of venture capital requirements. So how do we help them get money? What does that look like? How do we make impact debt more accessible and more available? How do we make other types of finance, other types of instruments, revenue-based loans, profit sharing agreements, all those other kinds of tools, which just don't have the same mind share. Like when people think about funding, they think about VC, they think about equity, pitching, Shark Tank, all that stuff, right? And again, that is not the source of funding for 95% of businesses. Like that's just not where to go. So, like that is, I guess for founders, I'd just be saying as early as you possibly can, go and talk to mentors, talk to advisors, like contact me, to say, I'm interested in thinking about what my options can be so that you don't lock yourself into certain pathways too early, that you begin to think about what's out there. And there's an awesome tool, and maybe I'll share that with you, Paul, called Capital Explorer that you can put with the notes for this, which has been built globally, which is a thing for entrepreneurs and founders to log on to, asks you a bunch of questions and kind of tells you, based on what you're doing and where you're at and how much money you're earning, blah, blah, this is the kind of best suited types of capital for you. And here are some of the sources of where you can get that capital from.
Great resource.
So stuff's beginning to be built now to help solve this, which is really exciting. And I think that's one of the things about working globally is I see all of the alternatives. Like the alternatives is kind of my world, right? And there's so many options emerging, so many funds emerging that are trying to do things different and to fill this missing middle. And that's really exciting. But, because it's probably by design quite decentralized and small, it's hard to find, right? And so that's the challenge. Like that market is very distributed, unevenly distributed. And for you as a founder to find that, it's much harder than going to finding Blackbird, and getting funding from them, right? It's just it's a different journey.
Well, we'll leave some of this information in the notes, and also ways to contact you about this as well, as you're an expert in the area. But there is a real gap there, and I've seen that, especially over the last 6 years. I wish I knew some of this stuff myself. So I wish I heard this interview myself 6 years ago, Ken.
I mean, we're always learning, Paul, which I think is the journey of an entrepreneur, right? Like that's what being an entrepreneur is just continually learning. It's continually learning. And
it is a journey. It is a journey, and I don't regret any part of it. Just one more question now. So with your experience at the intersection of content businesses, technology, and startups, it's very impressive, right? So can you share some insights on how startups can effectively leverage content and technology to drive growth and achieve their goals?
It's almost impossible these days, Paul, to have a business that's not using technology in some way, right? Like I think it's it's kind of why I worked for 6 or 7 years in technology, because I'm like, well, I need to understand that stuff because of the work I do. Like no business I'm going to be involved in is not going to have touch points with technology.
Exactly.
And it can be daunting, right? Especially if you've got no tech background to kind of engage with that. But, I think the two things about technology and content that I think are most important is brand and community. because I think, there's quite a lot of literature and thought out there around at the moment kind of saying, that community is kind of the new gold, right? Like, that's the way that people are successful, the way that you see a crowd equity raise on virtual. That's been possible because that organization has built a community of supporters.
Yeah.
And so you don't have customers anymore. You have community. Like, you build a community of people that value what you do. You create value for them in some way. And often your content creation is really about, how do I get my community talking to each other and creating value for people in their lives on some ongoing way, right? Yeah. And that relates to brand, which is about this positive affect that people have for what you do. And the deeper you are with that person in helping them solve problems in their lives, the greater the brand loyalty and brand association is going to be, right? So the deeper that you can create value, the deeper you can connect community to each other. People are commerce to some extent has replaced the commons. Like, we've all stopped going to church, and kind of church is the place that we meet. There's not a lot of common spaces out there. It's around brands or businesses or commerce that we often congregate now, right?
New religion.
Yeah, it is. But we're screaming out for connection and community, right? And meaning. Yeah. So if you as a founder can tap into what people are looking for and help build a community that people feel like they belong to, belonging and meaning are two of the most important things to us as humans that are looking for, people are looking to fill. So that content, the content creation, the technology are tools. That's all they are. They're tools to help do that, right? For you to be relevant, to you to help people find their place, to connect, community, meaning, belonging. Yeah. And if you're helping people solve real problems or helping them solve problems for others, then that builds your brand with those people as well. They will know about you, the positive affect. They will then talk about you to others. And then when you want to do something, it's that power, this power and strength of your community becomes your superpower, right? And if you look around at things, there's a great podcast and organization out of the US called Supercrowd, and they've run a conference that's all about kind of all these crowdfunding and crowdsource funding tools, but they are just one representation of like mobilizing crowds and movements, right? And so I think there's a lot of stuff going on now around crowd and movements and belonging and meaning and connection places that are largely digital now versus physical. And if you can find ways to marry digital and physical, I think you're in a really amazing sweet spot, right? But that to me is, I think as founders, you need to understand content creation and technology from the point of view of community and brand, and that they are tools to achieve that. They shouldn't be the tail that wags the dog, in the sense that dictates who you are, but you find the ways to use that and deploy it. And you shouldn't be scared of that. Most of that stuff you can do now. You don't have to be a software developer or an engineer to do that. All the tools are there, and a lot of them are really are quite cheap and free for you to use.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of this, it's increased since COVID, obviously. People have felt so isolated, so people are wanting communities even more than ever, I'd say.
Yeah, well, I think, we look around and the world can be a pretty daunting place, right? Like, especially you pay attention to some things, and you look at the early stages of the climate crisis, et cetera, right? Like, and the only thing that we have is each other. Ultimately, it's what it boils down to, and we need to cultivate and build those relationships. And
absolutely.
And whether you think it's a good or a bad thing, commerce is kind of the commons and where we congregate now. So, we should understand that as startups and as founders, is that that can have a powerful impact on people's lives.
Yeah, absolutely, and it does. Okay, so. Cam, so failure is an integral part of the entrepreneurial journey. Yeah. But the startup space often highlights success stories. And I know we've talked about this previously. And And I think there's too much of that, and there needs to be more, looking at failures and how people have overcome these failures. And can you tell us more about the significant setback you faced in your career and what you learned from that?
Sure. Yeah. Look, I think there's many, and kind of as I said before, Paul, on a different answer, that as entrepreneurs we're always learning, I think failure is necessary from the point of view of learning and teaching you lessons, right? Like I think that the most powerful teacher, is those things, and as long as you are learning from them, like then they're generally a good thing. So, I think one of the ones that I'd point to is, with this new venture that I'm, deep in the weeds on now called Lend for Good. So that's all about providing impact lending to that missing middle that we have been talking about, right? To help solve this capital gap problem. We launched, we were gung ho, we got some money. Well, we didn't launch. We went out and raised money, like a convertible note, to say, look, we're going to build and launch this new platform and get going. We found the provider, got an 8-week contract, bang, signed, great, let's get going. We paid 50% up front, let's build. That was, we wanted to get started in July. By the time we signed, it was the beginning of August. So we should have had our platform kind of late September, start of October. And there was an event in mid-October. I thought, great, we're going to launch there. No. It dragged on. And so as a board and as a group of founders, we sat down and said, okay, look, we've been telling everyone now for weeks that this platform's coming, but we've got no sense of when we're going to get it. Like it's out of our control, right? Yeah. We don't know. What are we going to do? And a pivotal thing for us, like having made the decision to having kind of understood that we were kind of had this thing as out of our control, we made the decision to find a way to launch in beta and say, look, let's just get started in doing impact loans and just doing impact lending now. Even though we don't have the platform ready, we reckon we can find ways to start doing it manually. It's going to be a lot more work, but let's just do it because we need to get momentum. Yeah. So that was a great decision. We did do that. And we, I think our reflection on that, it was one of the most important decisions we made as a business. Mm-hmm. And that was to put, and the three things that drove that was we had to control what we could control, not what we couldn't. We had to fulfill the promise we were making to our community that we were building, which is what we're here to do is to solve this problem. We'll get started. If we're facing a setback to do it the way we planned, we'll find a new way to do it. And then the third thing was it kept our spirits up. It gave us momentum because we were doing the thing that we signed up to do. Rather than sitting around waiting and pushing a technology provider to build our platform, which was just demoralizing, we got to focus on stuff that was uplifting and motivating for us to do. Yeah. We got to begin to see, individuals and organizations backing impact enterprises like ATEC, like it's one of the first loans we did was ATEC, so that's highly motivating. That build was a complete failure. Like we ended up firing them after 18 months and just going, we're not getting anywhere. Like it's not happening. A whole bunch of stuff changed in the world and whatever. And their strategy changed with, look, you know what, let's just shut it down. And we should have made that decision at 6 months, not 18 months. Right. But
I'm laughing because I've been in that situation. Yeah.
And so, but the key thing was, while that failed and we managed to extract that and the cost of capital to us was high as a result, and it's kind of had a huge impact on our trajectory and a whole bunch of stuff. The fact that we didn't let that define us and we pivoted a different way to launch and do stuff means that, that we were supposed to have that platform in October 2021. It's November 2023. We still don't have a platform, but we're going and we've got revenue. We've deployed over $1.6 million of loans. We've funded a whole bunch of amazing impact enterprises. We built a community. Like there's really good stuff. There's traction and there's solving the problem. And we just, we didn't let ourselves to get bogged down by that. And I think that's the key thing when you have failures as a startup founder is you need to try and find ways that the failure that you learn from doesn't kill your business, doesn't make you run out of runway or make you, like whether that's financial runway or personal resilience runway, right?
Yeah,
You need to be able to fail.
sometimes.
If you can, you want to fail fast and cheap, right? So that you can learn and keep going. Sometimes the arc on these things is not fast or cheap, and you've got to find different ways to do it, right? But I think my advice now is always to people is to try and deliver on your value proposition. Like, at the end of the day, what's the value proposition? Our value proposition wasn't a digital lending platform. The value proposition is we can solve the missing middle and we can get impact enterprises impact loans, right? So let's just do that. We found a way to do it and deliver on the value proposition, even as we were dealing with all the setbacks. And we're still working our way through that and, planning to launch our new digital lending platform in Q1 2024, right? So like a lot later than we hoped, and it's had significantly damaging impacts on the business, but we're still here and we're still going because we made that decision to deliver on the value proposition. And that's kept us motivated. It's built the community. It's got revenue. It's demonstrating what we're here for.
No, I mean, it's really difficult, isn't it, when you're building a platform and things blow out, or you just don't know if it's going to work, or costs blow out, and the more you put into it, the more you think, well, look, if I pull out now, I'm going to lose all of that.
Yes, exactly.
I'm going to lose more. It's such a difficult thing. That's what's happened with us. And
sunk cost fallacy, I think we call it, don't they, Paul? Yeah, and like we kept going for 18 months. Like it was my learning. Like my CTO was like, and I'm like, no, I believe, and she's like, no, and she was right.
Yeah, it's interesting. Hindsight's easy, but like if you're in doubt, it's like you really got to think about is it worth to keep going, or like in your case, is there another way I can do this?
Yes.
And then you're sort of catching up now, and you'll have a digital platform in the end. So.
We will, but I think that's what I'd say to people is like when you are in those, when you are faced by those challenges, and you will, like, no, I don't know a single startup that's ever kind of gone to plan, right?
No.
Is what's the value proposition for my customers? Like, what do I need to do to deliver that? And let's find a way to do that. As long as I'm doing that and that's working and it's executing, like you've got a business, you've got a startup, like, and keep learning, keep figuring out. But as long as you're delivering that value proposition and while you're there, like you can keep moving, and you as a founder will still be motivated, because that's something you can't underestimate, right? About how your own personal runway can run out.
Absolutely, and it happens to a lot. Like it's not an easy journey. There's so many ups and downs, and one day you're like, oh, top of the world. Next day you're like, oh, no.
Exactly. And we do it to ourselves, and that's because that like we imagine what if, but things don't change without lots and lots of energy. Like you go into physics of it, right? It's inertia is kind of natural state. Like you want to push against that, you got to burn a lot of energy to move things around.
And we are a particular type of breed, entrepreneurs. You need to be, That's why we can all relate with each other as well.
You do need to be. That's true.
These strange people.
Yeah. And I think what's exciting, especially here in Australia, I mean, you commented about the VC, but I think over the last 20 years, there's been such a rise in entrepreneurship. And I think that's a global thing, right? Like more people are doing it and seeing it as a career and seeing it as an option, which is great. It's a good thing. I think when I was first starting talking about youth entrepreneurship and stuff, when I was mentioning that, and it was what I was working on earlier, people were still very much tainted at that time by Alan Bond and Christopher Skase as entrepreneurs, right? Like that, those are the entrepreneurs that people knew about, and it was completely dodgy. And it's like, well, that's not what we mean. We've had long enough now that more people have forgotten who those people are. So
yeah. Well, that's when I first started in the VR space. Like 2017, it was so new. People, that 3D stuff. I don't know. Now it's very very different space. People understand it more, but still, it's got a long way to go.
Yeah.
So, to wrap
I think
up,
we underestimate, Paul, how long things take. I think that's one of our strengths and weaknesses as entrepreneurs is we're always optimistic about things, including how long things are going to take. And they don't take that long. They take at least triple it. Probably is to
in my case is probably tenfold. I was thinking 6 months.
Right. It took 6 years. Yeah. That's right. Exactly. But I think that's what we do. Like, I think it's as I say, it's part of our skill set is to be optimistic when other people are not.
Yeah, exactly. But I was learning along the way. I didn't have a business background, education, film, and a whole lot of other stuff background, but not business. So I had to learn all about the business side of things. So it was an interesting journey anyway. So,
and what it's, I think that's always, with the startup advisory kind of stuff that we do, there's always that tension between the entrepreneur and the enterprise. Like, I guess one of the things that we try and get people to understand is that they are not their business.
Yes.
Your entrepreneurship is something that's innate to you. It's currently representing itself through this enterprise you're building. But if this doesn't work, you will build the next thing. And you need to do this in a way that you don't destroy your entrepreneurial drive. How do you learn and pivot from that into the next thing if this is not going to work, right? And I think that's something I think, aspirationally, for better or for worse, there's pros and cons to that. The US is better than we are. But, I think that failure, I think a great quote that I always come back to is like, innovation looks like failure for the first 99 times. And then in the 100th time, everyone's like, oh, look at this, amazing invention that's come from nowhere. It's like, no. That didn't just come from nowhere. That was like so many failures to reach that point, right?
Yeah.
And
actually,
people don't see it. People don't see all those failures.
No. Another guest I had, Bernie, he was involved in the AI space in the 90s, and he said, look, it goes back 50 years. There's 50 years of work. And
That's right.
You think now, this is amazing, just, taking off, but there's 50 years of work behind that.
Exactly.
The technology caught up with it.
Yeah, that's right. And the different things kind of happen to make it possible. And I think, that's particularly in the impact space, I think it always helps for your humility to understand that anything that we achieve is because of what 2 generations before us have been working on the social change space, right? Absolutely. And that's also important because what we do today, we may not see the benefit of. That might be the social change agents 2 generations from us that benefit from the seeds that we plant today, right? Yeah. So anything that we do harvest is from what people have done before. Anything that we plant now will be harvested later. And both of those things are important as social change agents. We have to harvest what we can, tend what we can, nurture, and then plant, for stuff that we'll never see. And I think, that those kind of timeframes on a social change thing are very, I think, very important to understand as an entrepreneur and to not be disheartened about how long impact can take to have.
Yeah. I mean, just being a startup itself, it's a new technology. It's not known. Just that alone makes it really, really difficult because people don't know about it yet. So, so you've got to educate people, and there's so much you've got to do around that. But look, I just want to thank you for being on today, and thank you for all your good work as well, because it's really important that these impact startups and enterprises actually do get some funding, and so much good is done in the world. And so being part of that, I think is really fantastic. And I'm really, really grateful that you came on today and gave your advice and your story, which is really interesting, Cam. And I'm sure your wisdom will help many new and early startup founders and others as well.
Yep.
And be a great resource, this podcast for them and anyone in the startup space.
Yeah, look, thanks, Paul, for the opportunity to share a bit about my journey and story. And as I say, we'll put with the materials, links to Lend for Good, links to my LinkedIn profile, etc. I'll do what I can to help. As I say, I love helping awesome people do awesome stuff. That's what I'm here for. So if I can provide some assistance on the journey that you're on, then I'd love to hear from you.
No, I really appreciate that. And maybe you can come back in a year or two and just give us an update on all the different projects you're working on.
Tell you about some more failures. Yeah. What have we learned?
That's it. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Cam.
Thanks, Paul, for the opportunity.